Hello, this is Matt Hesser with Dimensional Nomad Games, and welcome to Magic Adventures in FNM Commander, Episode 1. Today we will be talking about the FNM games that we played at the LGS Zeus and Apollos in Pocatello, Idaho, that took place on July 14th, 2017. Now, at this event, I chose to play my Animar deck. You can get the deck list in the description below if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on the podcast, you can go to tappedout.net/mtg decks /animars legion/. Alternatively, you can just go to tappedout.net and look for my profile. It's under Shattered Empires. That's all one word, no spaces. All right, so Animar, for those of you who aren't aware, he's a commander who, every time you cast a creature spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on Animar, Soul of Elements. Creature spells you cast cost one less to cast for each +1/+1 counter on Animar, and he is a 1/1 legendary creature elemental that costs a blue, a red, and a green. He's a really fun commander. There's lots of ways you can build him. I've built him to different themes. However, this current version is just kind of um, blue, red, green, good stuff. A bunch of draw effects. Not as much ramp effects as you'll see out of some other decks. If you go looking up Animar, you'll see a ton of deck lists. Previous to this, I've built Animar artifacts and Animar dragons, both of which were pretty ridiculous. Now, I do plan on doing a deck tech video about Animar, so keep an eye out for that one. However, in this one, I'm just going to give a brief overview. Like I said, bunch of draw effects, bunch of big creatures, a couple of ways to untap my lands, and that will come into play later on as we go talking about it. All right, so there were 3 rounds for this particular night. In game one, it was Animar versus Marin of Clan Neltoth, um, and Titania, Protector of Argoth. Now, Marin of Clan Neltoth, for 2, a black and a green, you get a 3/4 legendary human shaman with whenever another creature you control dies, you get an experience counter. At the beginning of your end step, choose target creature in your graveyard. If that creature's converted mana cost is less than or equal to the number of experience counters you have, return it to the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand. Now, Marin is typically a reanimation style deck, and that was definitely what that player was doing in this game. The other deck, as I said, was Titania, Protector of Argoth. For 3 green green, you get a 5/3 legendary elemental. When Titania, Protector of Argoth, enters the battlefield, return target land from your graveyard to the battlefield. Whenever a land you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a 5/3 green elemental creature token. As you can probably tell, it's mono green, lots of land ramp, lots of ways to put lands into play, and then from there into your graveyard. Um, he said he was still tweaking it, but I thought the deck was actually pretty interesting. However, as you'll see, he ended up being his own downfall. Now, the first few turns were relatively tame, relatively normal. Um, the only big thing was that the Titania player decided that it would be okay to play Rites of Flourishing. Now, Rites of Flourishing is an enchantment for 2 and a green that says each player draws an additional card during the draw step, and each player can play an additional land. Now, this greatly enables the green deck as it wants to have lots of lands in play so it can then pitch them to the graveyard and get more elementals. But giving more lands to the other decks can and the extra card draw can be a two-edged sword. Now he played that turn 3, and of course Animar is a 3-drop. I was able to get him out on turn 3. Um, within just a few turns, I had built up a pretty decent board base by this time. And I think we had just gotten to 6 or 7 mana. I had like 7 creatures out. And if so, the Marin player decided that he needed to board wipe. So he played Living Death. Now, Living Death exiles all creatures in play, then takes all creatures from all graveyards and puts them into play from under their owner's control, and then takes the cards that are in exile and puts those in the graveyard. So it swaps out cards. Now, fortunately, he didn't have anything in his graveyard, so normally a black player waits until the Marin player waits until he has a graveyard full of stuff and then swaps them out. But I think at this point he was just more concerned with the ridiculous amount of things I had already had in play and was looking to control me. Um, Additionally, Living Death lets you choose a player, go through their graveyard or library, pick 3 creatures to put in their graveyard. So, um, he picked the Animar deck. He got Progenitor Mimic. Um, I have a green guy that when it enters or leaves play, I get a creature back. And then he also put in a third card I really should have paid attention to, but it really didn't matter. So we move on. Marin plays a birthing pod. Um, I recast Animar. I don't quite remember what the Titania player had done, but he had done something to annoy the Marin player. To which the Marin player replies by casting Kokosho. He then sacks Kokosho to the birthing pod. Now, birthing pod says sacrifice a creature, search your library for a creature that costs 1 CMC more, and put it into play. Now, Kokosho costs 6 and says when it dies, each opponent loses 5 life, and you gain that much life. So he sacks his Kokosho, we each lose 5, he gains 10, and then he goes and gets Sheoldred. Sheoldred is a black creature that says during your upkeep, reanimate one of your creatures. During each opponent's upkeep, they sacrifice a creature. Now, by this point, Titania had played Titania and made 2 tokens, so he just sacked a token. It got to my turn, and I had to sack Animar. Well, I would have, um, but uh, well, the Titania player decided he wanted to set himself up to combo win the next turn. So Marin plays Kokosho, sacks Kokosho to get Sheoldred. Moves to Titania player. The Titania player sacks a token. He then, and by this point, I'm going, oh crap, I've only got 6 mana. I barely recast Animar. I mean, if I get 1 more mana, I'll be able to cast Animar again. But then I'll just sack him to Sheoldred because I'm only going to be playing 1 creature at a time since Animar costs so much at this point. I needed to build up a state. So I'm panicking. But then the Titania player decides to play Heartbeat of Spring. Now, Heartbeat of Spring is a green version of an old card called Mana Flare. Now, Mana Flare costs 2 and a red, and Heartbeat of Spring costs 2 and a green. Both say whenever a player taps a land for mana, it adds 1 additional mana of any type that land produced. So effectively, it doubles basic lands, and then depending on your other lands. But so I looked at the amount of mana I had in play with double mana, then I realized I had enough to recast Animar, or I could cast the Primal Surge that I've been holding in my hand forever. Now, Primal Surge costs 8 and 2 green, so it's a 10 casting cost spell. But what's amazing about it is it says exile the top card of your library. If it is a permanent, put it into play and then repeat this process. So as long as you don't hit a non-permanent, you just keep flipping cards and putting them into play. So I decided to do that. I got about 20 cards, including a bunch of land, a bunch of enablers, thing, things that let me untap land. Now the downside was that I didn't get anything that got me haste, but I did get a bunch of lands that then let me recast Animar, cast the few creatures from my hand. I could then play the um, Oracle of something. It costs 7. It says when it enters the battlefield, draw cards equal to the difference between your hand and an opponent's hand. So the Marin player had 6 cards in hand. I only had 1, so I drew 5 more cards. I got a bunch of untap effects, things like Great Whale, a bunch of clones, copied them all. I had a couple of other things like Soul of the Harvest is that I draw whenever I cast a creature spell. So I kept casting spells until I could get to one of my haste mechanics. I finally got Urabrask. Urabrask is a 4/4 for 3 red red that says your creatures have haste and your opponent's creatures enter the battlefield tapped. So I finally got my haste mechanic, swung, killed the board. And that's one of the things I like about Animar. He's very swingy. Yeah, you can take him out, but as long as I've got enough mana to recover, he recovers and stabilizes pretty quickly. Especially when someone plays Heartbeat of Spring or some other ridiculous effect that also heals me. Now, granted, the extra card draw helped, but it was more the double mana because that let me do the Primal Surge rather than waiting and waiting until I could hold another creature to play both Animar and another creature, hoping to not lose it to Shieldred, and then whatever else he played. So that won me game one. Now, in game two, we have a new set of commanders. We've got me still playing Animar, Soul of Elements. Then we have another person playing Atraxa. Um, and then another person playing Kalia of the Vast. Now, Atraxa, Praetor's Voice, costs green, white, blue, black for a 4/4 legendary angel horror. It has flying, vigilance, death touch, and lifelink. And at the beginning of your end step, proliferate. Now, generally, Atraxa decks, they're usually either Super Friends, which is playing a bunch of Planeswalkers, because you can proliferate their loyalty counters, or some other kind of shenanigans, usually involving +1/+1 counters. Now, this particular Atraxa, I believe, was going a Voltron style. It didn't seem as efficient to me, but it was interesting to see nonetheless. I know at one point it got to be like a 10/10, which was ridiculous. In a different game that we played, but not this game. So anyway, so there's the attraction player, and then Kali of the Vast. She costs one, a white, black, and red for a 2/2 legendary human cleric. She has flying, and whenever Kali of the Vast attacks an opponent, you may put an angel, demon, or dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking that opponent. Dropping creatures for free is always fun. You'll see big fat dragons, big fat angels, big fat demons, just being slammed into play. Uh, the other thing that you do with Collier of the Vast is you play things that give her evasion, so she can't be blocked, so she has less option to be killed, or things like Maids of Ith that let you just pull her out of combat. That way, you still get the combat trigger, but then you don't have to worry about losing her, recasting her, and all that stuff. All right, so this game was one of those that usually it's a slow start, but I'm looking at my opening hand. I've got my 3 mana so I can cast Animar. And then I also had Sakashima the Imposter in my hand. So Sakashima the Imposter is a clone for 2, a blue and a blue. However, unlike other clones, she keeps her name. So she becomes the text box and CMC and power and toughness and creature types of the creature, in this case Animar, but she keeps her name, so she's Sakashima the Imposter with all of that creature's abilities, which is really nice with Animar because with Animar gets a counter and Sakashima gets a counter, and then all your creatures are still one less for each of those +1 counters, so it really doubles down and lets you play things faster. So the other two players, the Attraction player and the Kalia player, both had pretty slow starts. Mostly just land go, land go, land go. So I played Animar turn 3. Then I played um, Sakashima, the Soul of Elements, turn 4, well, which gave Animar a +1/+1 counter. Turn 5, I pay 1 to play a small creature. That put a counter on both Animar and Atraxa. So now I have 3 counters total, so all my creatures cost 3. I then played a Morph. Now morphs cost 3, and then they go face down, and that put another counter. So now the counter is 5, and then um, I had 4 mana available, so 4 mana in play. 5 mana less lets me play Void Winnower for 9. So Void Winnower says your opponents can't cast even casting cost spells, and they can't block with creatures that have even casting cost either. So it's a huge inconvenience for a lot of people. The Atraxa deck had no answer for it. However, the next turn, the Kalia player had an angel that let it exile the Void Winnower. So that would have let them play. However, when it gets to my turn, I had both Great Whale and Tamur Sabretooth in hand. Now, Great Whale costs 5 and 2 blue for a 5/5 that says when it enters the battlefield, untap up to 7 lands. So, because it costs 5 less, it only cost me 2 blue to play. So I tap 2 blue, tap a bunch of other lands, and then I net a bunch of mana. I then was able to play Tamur Sabretooth. Tamur Sabretooth says for 1 and a green, bounce a creature you control other than itself. So I spend 4 mana to cast, so 2 mana, so 1 and a green to bounce the Great Whale, and then 2 blue to replay the Great Whale. So for every 4 mana I spend, I get 7 mana. So that effectively gives me infinite mana. So I then proceed to just cast whatever the heck I wanted. I had a bunch of draw effects and uh, bounce effects, so I could play creatures that let me draw when they come into play, and I can just put them back in my hand so I can recast them. Eventually drew in a haste, killed the board. So that was just one of those ridiculous. It was turn 5, everyone, and then I just played most of my deck to kill everybody. It's still fun. I mean, I like Animar. I've taken out a lot of the ridiculous combos. Deadeye Navigator is one of those easy ones. And Ancestral Statue. Now, Ancestral Statue is a artifact creature that costs 4, and then says when it comes into play, return one of the creatures you control to its owner's hand. Now, you can choose to return it itself. So once you get 4 counters on Animar, you can then cast the Ancestral Statue as many times as you want, so which would puts more counters on Animar. If you have any ETB triggers for creatures entering or cast, that all triggers them. So it's an easy way to get all of your cast, draw, and cast +1/+1 counters. With Animar having built-in pro white, pro black, you usually can one-shot one of the other players because statistically there's a bunch of people out there playing black. Like in this case, both of my opponents were playing black. I could have one-shot either of them, but instead I just ended up casting enough creatures that I just swung for lethal. So Animar wins game 2. All right, so we move on to game 3. Now, unfortunately, I can't remember what one of my opponents was playing. I thought I had written it down, but unfortunately I didn't. I will do better for the next episode. But in this case, the other player was playing partner commanders. Now, partner commanders say if both creatures have partner, you can use them both as your commander. The first was Rival Soul Render, and then the second was Ikra Shiriki the Usurper. So this gives him access to white, green, and black. Unfortunately, I didn't really get to see much of his deck. I'm assuming it's some kind of a reanimation effect, given that Revos lets you return a creature from your graveyard to your hand once a turn, and then Ikra says, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness, and it's a native 3/7 by itself. So, um, again, this is one of those games that just got out of hand super fast, even without meaning to. Now, I kept a 2-land hand because one of the other cards was a Bird of Paradise. Now, Bird of Paradise costs 1 green and it gives you a 0/1 flying that taps for any color. So I had a forest and an island in my hand, so I could play my forest. So I played my forest on turn one, and then I cast Birds of Paradise. And then turn two, I played the island, tapped the bird for red, tapped for blue, tapped for green, played Animar. Turn three, I played Bloom Tender. Now, Bloom Tender costs one and a green and says tap, add mana for each mana among permanents you control. So this is a three-color deck. I had Animar, who's all three colors. So Bloom Tender taps for three. Um, and then, so I was waiting for them to have some kind of response, and then the responses never came, never came. So it gets back to my turn. I played a third land that gave me access to 6 mana. Um, and 6 mana lets me do a ton of work in this deck. Um, with enough creatures in hand, I was able to cast pretty much everything in the deck until I was able to uh, get back to my hasting effects. Now, Urabrask is one of my hasting effects, and then Maelstrom Wander is one of the other hasting effects, giving all my creatures haste. Um, but yeah, between Cloud of Fairies, which is one in a blue, enters the battlefield, untap 2 lands. With Animar out, it only costs me 1 blue, so it untaps 2 lands, gives me more mana. Then I played a Peregrine Drake, which costs 3 and 2 blue. No, 4 and a blue, untaps 5. And then I had a whole bunch of clone effects that just let me copy that thing, give me more and more and more and more mana. And then I did another Primal Surge. That Primal Surge just gets a lot of work in this deck. There's 3 non-permanents, which is Primal Surge, Genesis Wave, and um, Weird Harvest. Genesis Wave is 3 green and X. Reveal the top X cards of your library. Each permanent with casting costs extra less is put into play. And then Weird Harvest is 2 green and X. Each player searches for X creatures and puts them into their hand. Generally, with that one, I usually go and get win condition and then win that turn. Otherwise, there's no point in me playing it. But yeah, so again, just getting a bunch of mana, leaving a bunch of things in play, playing that Primal Surge, getting a ton of cards into play, and just ruining everyone's day. So yeah, Animar seems to win the same way every time. Either he plays a whole bunch of stuff all at once because they're all super free, super cheap, and he uh, has a lot of draw effects, or there are the Primal Surge into like 10, 20, 30 cards. Now, there have been times where I've done a Primal Surge and the top card was Genesis Wave. I was like, oh, well, I just paid 10 mana to exile my other big win condition. I think I still won that game anyway because I still had a bunch of creatures and could play them. It was one of those just like win more cards. Like, if I could play half the deck, that'd be fantastic. Anyway, so that was game number 3. Animar went 3-0 um, that Friday Night Magic. We talked to the other players, just asked if anyone wanted to do a fourth round. They're like, nope, we'll just let Animar win. It was a lot of fun. I really like Xeus and Apollos. They have a great group of people there. And even though I keep toning down Animar, people enjoy playing against it. I've been switching between Animar and Captain Sisse, both of decks available on my Tapped Out account. Again, that's tappedout.net. Look up Animar's Legion if you want to look up this specific deck, or you can look up Shattered Empires. That's all one word, and then you can see all of my decks. They're all online. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed our Magic Adventures in FNM Commander, and hope to talk to you all again.